The Reason for God by Timothy Keller. To Kathy, the Valiant. Preface. 10 years ago, The Reason for God was published in a very different cultural moment. A decade of change provides an opportunity for some assessment. Is there still a need for a book such as this? The original introduction, now penned over 10 years ago, predicted that our American society was going to become polarized between the devoutly religious and the more thoroughly secular. As far as I can see, that has happened. While many people have indeed been identifying as no religious preference, at the same time religion in general and Christianity in particular have been growing rapidly across the globe among non-Western, non-white people. This Christianity is no watered-down version where adherents are invited to believe less and less. Rather, it is marked by a strong belief in the Bible and in the need for conversion through faith in Christ. Through both immigration and conversion, these worldwide trends are strengthening the churches in the United States. In the United States, more conservative Christianity has been growing almost as fast as the population, and therefore is holding its own, even as a more mainline established churches are shrinking. There are still voices predicting the collapse of Christianity, usually while rightly pointing out that predominantly white churches are declining. But the American church is becoming more multi-ethnic, as it should, and therefore is not collapsing. In fact, the overall percentage of non-believers and secular people in the world is declining. What does this mean? This parallel growth in the number of both devout believers and devout secularists is why both groups in our society feel besieged. This siege mentality has only increased in the last decade. There is less airing of views and fewer opportunities for people on both sides to lay out their arguments and intuitions in order to make their beliefs as cogent as possible to the other side. Instead, there is a conviction that since we have reason on our side and they have just closed their eyes to the truth, therefore all we need to do is denounce and mock the opposing view. This attitude is especially inappropriate for Christians. While a Christian profession of faith has many good reasons and evidence to support it, as the very title of this book states, it still requires faith, which, Christians believe, only God can give. It is therefore purposeless and cruel to mock unbelievers. Rather, they deserve our prayers and our friendship. On the other hand, secular people also should re-examine their own self-narrative, namely, that they are not exerting any faith, that they are simply using their reason and seeing things as they are. Philosopher Charles Taylor's critique of this view is compelling. To be a secular person, to believe, for example, that there is no God, and yet there are nonetheless human rights, is to base one's view of the world on a combination of reason and faith, just like religious people do. If we are going to have any hope of social peace in a religiously polarized culture, we will need to hold two attitudes in tension. First, since our respective views of reality are based in great part on faith, we must stop expecting the rest of the world to simply bow its knee to our particular set of faith assumptions. We should not attack, mock, and speak as if our beliefs are self-evident to all decent people. On the other hand, since all worldviews are also based on reason, we should try to help the other side see the reasons for our faith, seeking to make our views as intelligible as possible to people who inhabit different moral frameworks. If we practice both this modesty and this confidence as we speak to one another, that would at the very least enhance mutual respect and would begin to create an atmosphere in which people of deeply different beliefs can work together in our common life as co-citizens. It might also lead us to revise some of our beliefs. This book, The Reason for God, and a subsequent book I have written, Making Sense of God, are dedicated to the belief that it is possible to hold these two attitudes at once. Of course, the books are, as it were, cases for belief in Christianity to those who don't believe. But I sought to conduct the discussion with both respect for skeptics and yet the confidence that Christian faith is cogent. My efforts to do this are far from perfect, yet the response to the book shows that the project has borne some fruit. I have been surprised and gratified at the response to The Reason for God. In one sense, the reactions are what one would expect. Many Christian believers have professed that it was convincing, and many non-believers have claimed that it was not convincing. What I did not expect was the number of those in the middle. The ones who said either, I don't believe, but this is a well-executed effort that makes me think, or who have actually said, this makes it possible for me to believe. The quantity of these kinds of middle responses was greater than I had ever expected, and they indicate the kind of respectful yet thoughtful talking and listening that changes minds and hearts. So, I am grateful for the reception of the book, and I've listened to the critiques. One of them is that, in some ways, the book does not do enough to simply present the life and words of Jesus himself to the reader. I agree that, in the end, Jesus himself is the most compelling argument for Christianity. Yet I think that rather than trying to reproduce it, I will simply urge people to read the New Testament accounts of Jesus for themselves and engage with him directly. I do that because I do not think that he is merely a religious figure, but rather a living power, and my sincerest hope is that seekers will encounter him for themselves. Tim Keller, January 2018.